Alright, so before I start this video, if you want to get your face rated, make sure to hit me up on my email. I will have it down in the description, or I will have my IG down in the description as well. You can DM me and I'll give you the instructions so you can get your face rated, and I'll do it all for free. No charges needed. And yeah, so for today, I'm doing Nicki Minaj. This is going to be a Nicki Minaj face rating, and this is going to be off of 44 facial assessments. Really, two of the facial assessments would not count for this one. And let's see what Nicki Minaj is. Her overall facial rating is a 5.7. How rare is that? That's 1 in 3 people. The percentage of people is the top 33% of people. Her side facial harmony score is 40%. Her front facial harmony score is 53%. Her total facial harmony score is 48%. Her facial dimorphism is a 4.5, so how feminized the face looks. Her body fat factors is a 6.5. And her miscellaneous features is an 8.5. Her tier list is a tier 1 ideal, tier 2 near ideal, tier 3 normal, tier 4 slight flaw, tier 5 flaw, tier 6 huge flaw, and tier 7 breaks harmony. Now, these are the overall facial assessment breakdowns of the biggest flaws that I feel like she has in her overall face. I'm gonna go through the front and from the side. So the front profile only has one major flaw that is very noticeable when looking at her facial features, going from the eyebrows down to the upper portion of her top lip. This is what we call the facial width to height ratio, FWHR measurement. It shows how compact your features are relative to the widest part of your face, and Nicki's features are spread too far for it to be considered attractive. So her facial compactness isn't compact enough, so that's another flaw from the front profile view. So the side profile has multiple measurements that deviate far from the ideal, but I'm not going to narrow it down to a particular flaw that is noticeable. The nose is downswung to a large degree, and on top of that, the nose protrusion is extremely lengthy relative to a nasal bridge, and these two flaws will give a unique facial characteristic that might be seen to others as an unideal feature. And so her nose is too downswung, and her nose protrusion is a little bit too protruded for a female face, so that will be also a flaw for her in the side view profile. Now, these are rarity scores of other celebrities, so you can compare. So her eye separation ratio, so it goes from the distance between the pupils relative to the distance between her cheekbones, and hers is at a tier 2 at 44.8%. And this will be ideal for a male, but not for a female, since females have a little bit wider set eyes. So this will be a tier 2, so a slight deviation from the near ideal. So that would be considered near ideal. Her facial thirds is even. It shouldn't deviate 3% from 33. And as you can see, all of them are pretty much damn near at 33%. So this is decent. Her canthal tilt is positive at 9.5. So this is a really good feature, and that is ideal. Her facial width to height ratio, so FWHR, like I said again, so how compact is her face? Her face is not compact at all, and it's because of her eyebrows. I believe her eyebrows are very high set, and hers is at 1.77, and ideally you want to have at least 1.9, so she does deviate a little bit far from it. Her jaw frontal angle, so the angle view of the jaw from the front, and hers is at 111 degrees, and this is an extremely wide jaw. This is probably one of her biggest flaws, and usually women do have more wider jaws, but hers is way too wide, and that is going to be a tier 5, so that's going to be a flaw. Her cheekbone high setting, so how high set is your cheekbones relative to your mid face, and hers is at a tier 2, so that is near ideal. She does have somewhat of a protrusive cheekbones that is medium to high set, but is her bigonial width, so how wide is her jaw relative to the width of her face or the cheekbone area, and hers is at a tier 1 at 89%, and this is within the ideal range, even though women tend to have 1% a deviation between the lower jaw because they have less wider jaws. Her jaw is still within the ideal range. her total facial height to width ratio. So this measures how long your face is relative to how wide it is, and hers is at 1.32. So this is within the ideal range. So she does not have a very long face, and this is perfect for a female face. Her chin to fill trim ratio is a tier 2 at 2.6. So what this means is that her chin is just a tad bit too tall for her fill trim. And her fill trim, it goes from the bottom, so from the nasion, so from the bottom of the nose down to the upper lip, compared relative to the chin, and hers is at 2.6. So this is just a slight deviation from, so it will be considered near ideal. So that's really not really much of a flaw at all. Her neck width, so how wide is her neck, and hers is a tier 1 at 75%. So women do tend to have less wider necks than men, and hers is perfectly wide for a female face. Her mouth to nose width ratio is a 1.38, and this is within the normal range, obviously, but from looking at this, it should be within the ideal range, because you can kind of tell, because like her nose is supposed to be within the inner eye creases, and her mouth is actually supposed to be within the iris of the eyes. And hers is her mouth is just a little bit too narrow. It needs to be a little bit spread it out more. So if she did have a little bit wider of a mouth, this probably would have been in the ideal range for a female. Her mid-face ratio is a tier 1, so this is perfect. So she does have a very compact mid-face, a little bit more on the compact side, but it's still within the ideal range. And it gets the difference between the eyes versus the actual mid-face, so that from the eye line down to the upper lip compared to the pupil distance, and hers is perfect. Her eyebrow settiness, so how high set is her eyes relative to her eye line, and hers is at 1.6. So she does have eyes that are a little bit too high for her face, so that is going to be a tier 4, so that will be a slight flaw. Her eye spacing, one eye test, is going to be at 91%, and this is not a flaw by any means necessary. This is very close to the ideal range, and some people might consider that ideal, but that's near ideal. Her eye aspect ratio is a tier 2 at 3.4, and that means that her eyes are a little bit too narrow for it to be a ideal, but this is still within the near ideal. Her eyes is a little bit too narrow. Her lower lip to upper lip is a tier 2 at 1.36. This is extremely close to the ideal range, and she's getting a lot of near ideals. She does have a lot of features that are very close to the ideal range. So a lot of these things are not really a flaw, but they just have a slight deviation. Her deviation from her ipsilateral iliac angle to her jaw frontal angle, and the ipsilateral iliac angle is the angle that's created from the midface, so from the nasion all the way to the outer corners of the eyes, and you want them to be the exact same or parallel to each other, and hers deviate from 14 degrees, and if it deviates more than 15 degrees, then it will be considered a flaw, and for her, she's just slightly under that, so that's within the normal range. Her eyebrow tilt, so how tilted are her eyebrows at 11.5. Women tend to have more tilted eyebrows, so this is perfectly fine within the ideal range. Her bitemporal width is a tier 4, so that is going to be a slight flaw. She does have a very narrow forehead relative to her width of her face, so that is going to be just a very slight flaw. Her lower third proportion, so your third is supposed to be evenly divided, and your upper third goes from the nasion down to the lip line, is supposed to be around 33%, which hers is exactly around 33%, so this is perfect. And it shouldn't deviate more than 3% from 33%, kind of like the facial thirds in a way. It's kind of similar to that. Her ipsilateral iliac angle, like I said again, now the actual angle of it is at 97 degrees, so this is perfectly fine. And this is the highest range that it can possibly be. So what this means is that her gonial angle is a tier 2, so this is near ideal at 113 degrees, and this is very masculinized. That's why she gets a tier 2. If it was at least around 114, then she would have been actually been within the ideal range. But her gonial angle is a little bit too tight, and this is going to be around the masculine range, so she does have a very tight and angular jaw, and usually women tend to have less of an angular jaw and a little bit more wider angle, but for hers is kind of like the opposite. Her nasal frontal angle is 127 degrees, and this is ideal. And she does have somewhat of a brow ridge um, relative to her nasal bridge, and she does have that little indent. Her mandibular plane angle, so how downswung is her mandible relative to the Frankfurt plane angle, and hers is at 9 degrees, and this is going to be a pretty big flaw at a tier 5. And the reason why is because, like I said again about her gonial angle, this is the main reason why it's a flaw is because her mandible is too flat to the ground. It's literally parallel to the ground, and you do not want that. Her mandible should be a little bit more downswung. If her mandible was downswung, it would have been within the ideal range. So this is the main reason why her gonial angle wasn't in the ideal range. Her ramus to mandible ratio is a tier 1 at 70%. So the ramus length relative to the mandible is at 70%, and this is within the ideal range. If it was past, let's say at 80%, it would have been outside the ideal range. But for hers to be 70%, she does have a lot of ramus, so she does have a very lengthy jaw, and that is good. Her facial convexity from the glabella, so it goes from the chin to the subnasal, and then to the glabella, so from the brow ridge. And hers is at a tier 4, which is at 160 degrees, and this is too rounded, so she does have a very rounded face from the side, and that is unideal. Her submental cervical angle is 100 degrees, and 100 degrees is perfectly fine for any whether it's a man or female, any face. 100 degrees is perfectly fine. So this also measures if you have a high hyoid, so that fat or that fat under the chin area. If you have a high hyoid, the angle is going to be more obtuse, and that is going to be unideal. So her nasal-facial angle, so this measures how relative the nasal bridges to the chin, and to see if they have a good relationship. And hers is at 30 degrees, and that is at the lower end of the ideal range, but it's still ideal nevertheless. And we're going to find out why that is at the lower end of it. But yeah, they do have a great relationship, and this does not take the facial convexity into account, so remember that. Her nasolabial angle is a tier 5, and this determines whether your nose is downswung or upturned. And for a female, you want a nose that is more upturned than downswung. And for hers to be at 71 degrees, that is extremely downturned, and she does lose a lot of points for that. Her orbital vector is neutral. Now, she does have protrusive cheekbones from the side, but do you have any bone support from the side, or do you have any bone support from underneath the eyes? So your orbital vector, all right? So don't get your cheekbone protrusiveness mixed with your orbital vector. Those are two completely different bone structures. One protrudes forwardly and one protrudes from the side. And for hers does not protrude forwardly enough relative to a Frankfurt plane angle, so the side that you see right here, that line right here. And hers is even out with her eyes, so she doesn't have bug eyes or anything like that, but hers is just neutral, so it's within the normal range. Her total facial convexity is a tier 1 at 137 degrees, and this also takes into account your nose. So before the other facial convexity didn't take into account her nose, this one takes into account her nose or her nasal protrusion, and hers is at the very lower end of it, so this would be ideal nevertheless. Her mental labial angle is a tier 6, and this gets the indent of the chin from the chin to the bottom lip, and that indent and with this indent, what that tells me is that her lower lip and her chin are just way too protrusive to create this acute angle that you see right here. So they do not have a great relationship with each other, so they do not harmonize at all. Her facial convexity from the nasion, so the only difference between the glabella and the nasion is that instead of it being taken from the glabella, it's taken from the nasion, and hers is at 153 degrees, and that will be a tier 5. It's just her facial convexity just a bit too rounded. just in general. And if your facial convexity is too rounded, you can still look attractive, but it's not going to be ideal. Her nasal projection, so how projected is her nose, and hers is at 69%. So it takes the width divided by the nasal length, not the nasal length, the nasal bridge, my fault. So the width of the nose divided by the nasal bridge, and hers is at 69%. And 69% is a little bit too projected, so she has a little bit too projected of a nose. And it might not seem like that because it's kind of downswung. Her nose is kind of downswung, so it might not seem like that, but her nose is a little bit too projected for a female, and that will be unideal. Her nasal width to height projection is at 89%, so this takes into account how long her nose is, so the actual length of the nose relative to her outline, so how long the nose is relative to her face, and hers at tier 2, so this is not technically a flaw, this is close to the ideal range, so this is not bad. Her rictus elan, so these 4 measurements are going to be, let me just show it right here, our lip measurements. So let's start from the elan, so it goes from the nasal tip down to the chin, and her bottom lip touches the line a little bit, so that's why I gave it a tier 2. But if her bottom lip was a little bit behind the line and her upper lip just came back a little bit more, this would have been ideal, but this is pretty close to it, I'm not gonna lie. Her H line goes from the tip of her upper lip down to her chin, and the bottom lip is supposed to touch, which it does, so that would be a tier 1. Her S line goes from the middle of the nose down to the chin, where the camella is at, and this is a tier 3 because her bottom lip passes the line, and her upper lip kind of passes the line as well, so that would be a tier 3. Her burstal line goes from the subnasal down to the chin, and your bottom and upper lip actually is supposed to be past the line, but your upper lip is supposed to be more past the line than your bottom lip. And this is kind of hard to tell just by looking at it, but I did kind of like measure a little bit just to make sure, and it is perfect. And these are all relative. It doesn't have to be extremely exact. They're all relative. And it can kind of go based off of ethnicity as well, ethnic group, because people have different lips sizes and stuff like that, and nasal protrusion. But anyway, her nasal mental angle is a tier 2 at 120 degrees. So this is still within the attractive region, you know what I'm saying? But her, like I said again, this takes into account her nasal bridge relative to her nose, or her nasal protrusion relative to her nose. The only difference between this measurement and the other measurement, which is the nasal facial angle, is that this also takes into account her facial convexity as well. And like I said again, her facial convexity is a bit too rounded. That's why this measurement is a little bit too low. And this is still within the near ideal range, so this is not bad at all. Her gonian to mouth relationship is a tier 1, so her gonian is below her mouth line, and this is good. So she does have an adequate size for a jaw, and this is perfect. Her recession relative to a Frankfurt plane angle, so this measures if your jaw is recessed, and she's not recessed at all. She actually has a lot of jaw protrusion. Now from looking at this, I can probably see why her face is very rounded, and I can also see why her nose and her chin kind of harmonize with each other, because her chin is very protruded and her nose is also protruded as well. So I can kind of see where the relationship comes from. Her brow ridge inclination, so how inclined her brow ridge is, and hers is at 5 degrees, and that will be a tier 5. So that isn't too inclined back enough. As a female, you want a brow ridge that is inclined a little bit more back. Ideally around that 8% will be okay. She's not too far away from that, but that's just still within the normal range. And you do not want a brow ridge that is not inclined at all or protrusive, like kind of like a Rihanna. You do not want those type of brow ridge, but you can still look attractive either way. It goes with those type of brow ridges. Her nasal tip angle is at 116 degrees, and 116 degrees is at the extreme low end. Since it's at the extreme low end, so what this means is that a nasal tip that's 116 degrees at the lowest end is that she has an extremely pointy nose, and anything more pointier than this will be considered ideal by any standard, and this is perfectly fine for her, so that will be a tier 1. All right, so remember, like I said again, if you want to get your face rated, I will have my IG down in the description. Make sure to DM me. I'll give you instructions, and it will be free. and it'll take me probably at least 24 to 48 hours to get it done, depending on how busy I am. And like I said, I would do it for free. I'm out.